Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. Today, one of the greatest, nicest people in the industry. We've got Shannon Hudson from Redline Gauge Works. I mean, you are, and people know this. So,
Yeah, I guess
like,
if I guess that could be a good thing and a bad thing.
I mean, unless somebody comes on and be like, "Oh my gosh, Shannon, what a pain in the neck that guy." Yeah, yeah, that doesn't have that's a sentence that never happens when your name comes up,
That's
ever.
good. That's really good to hear. That means I'm doing
So,
something
how you
right.
doing?
I'm doing great. Everything's good, man. We are jamming. The business right now, as you know, is in the hot rod industry is just nuts right now. People are just chomping at the bit to finish projects and start new ones. Take over abandoned ones is the real popular
Mm-hmm.
thing right now. You see a lot of projects that got started, 10 years ago, got abandoned, my Plymouth Valiant included.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so it's a good time for us right now, and the hot rod industry is just jamming. We're just on fire.
That's fantastic. So I want to give people a little background, right? So,
Okay.
you've been Redline Gauge Works has been probably the premier gauge restoration shop in the country for years. You've done gauge clusters for television, for celebrities, for normal people like myself, for just about anyone and everything.
Well, you're
And
not normal.
as well, I mean, I mean, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
But I want to say that it's interesting when you first get into the hobby, you look for different things that can help you succeed, right? You look for door panel restoration, interior, and I think
Yes,
gauges are one of those things that are almost overlooked in a sense, which is why the aftermarket is so like, you've got Autometer and you got all these aftermarket companies that
for
provide
sure.
great things. But if you want your stock gauge cluster to go back to new or
Yeah.
better than new internals and everything, there is truly only one place and one person you need to talk to, and that's Redline Gauge Works with Shannon. So, um, it's just how did you get into this business? I mean, I know the backstory, but tell
Yeah.
everybody else that might not know the backstory of how you got into this business because
It
it's a really cool niche hobby or piece of the
it is.
hobby.
It's very cool actually. It's funny because my best friend when I was growing up, so I'm 17, 18 years old, was my buddy named Dirk, and his dad, his name was Hartmut, a very German name, Hartmut Behrens. And he owned a shop called North Hollywood Speedometer. Now, North Hollywood Speedometer was the premier instrument panel restoration shop for all the German vehicles. So Mercedes 190 SL, all the Porsche 356 Speedsters, 540Ks, Jaguars. We did all the European stuff. So my buddy and I, Dirk, we were racing remote control cars at the time. So, and I was the go-to guy for building the remote control cars. So I was the one soldering and doing the shock rebuilds and doing all that
Are we
stuff.
talking like Tamiya grasshoppers and hornets and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Like back
well, and
then?
this is the first generation of like Team Associated, Team Losi, and Kyosho were the
Yeah.
premier race vehicles, where Tamiya was more of like the hobbyist vehicle. But people were
Hmm.
hopping them up and building those. I actually raced a Tamiya Boomerang that I put a bigger motor in, put a heat sink on it. I put RC10 shocks on it. I did all this cool stuff to it.
That's
So his
awesome.
his mom was like, "Hey, Shannon's obviously really good at working with small stuff. Why don't you hire him to work as a technician at North Hollywood Speedometer?" And that was when I was 18. So that was 1988. And I went to work for North Hollywood Speedometer. So I cut my teeth restoring Volkswagen speedometers, Porsche 356 Speedsters, 911s. I was there
Really?
15 years. So I was there a really long time. And then I started doing some of the American speedometers. So I started rebuilding, Camaro, Chevelle, Roadrunner, all that kind of stuff. So I cut my teeth on rebuilding American stuff. And there was a local Mopar restoration shop right down the street in North Hollywood called Restorations by Julius. You probably know him, very well known in the Mopar restoration
Super,
crowd.
super, super famous. Super famous.
Yeah. So I'm actually driving by his shop. I'm driving a 1967 Plymouth Fury 3 to work every day when I first started working there. So I was already kind of like groomed into the Mopar thing. That was already like my bag, like these cars are the ones that stand out to me. So I noticed, Hemi Roadrunners and six pack Cudas and stuff out in front of his shop. So I go into his shop and start talking to him. And he was a mechanic for Honda. So he started his own independent Honda mechanic shop, and then he did the Mopar restoration on the side. So I went and I'm talking to him about the Mopar stuff, and he's actually just working on Hondas in the back. That was the bread and butter. And then the Mopar stuff was just passion for him, which eventually led to him selling the Honda business. And because he got so popular, you know, and that was grease pencil marking restorations. This wasn't really hot rods. This is more like the show quality stuff, you know. And I started doing all his business, all his repairs, all his restorations. At that point, we started doing the amp to voltmeter conversions, which are real popular with the Mopar crowd. And then, lo and behold, 2003 came along, and my father-in-law got ownership of the building that we're in. That was his dad's building that was built in 1920s. So it's got some historic value in Santa Clarita and in Newhall and stuff like that. So when he got ownership of it, he's like, hey, that would make a good speedometer shop. He's like, I'll just charge you a monthly rent and you can open your own business, you know, and concentrate on the American muscle car stuff, which is what I was into. So that happened, and my brother and I started the business in 2003. And my brother and I were partners up until about 2007. And then we figured out this business doesn't make enough money to support me and him with 3 teenage boys that literally ate him out of house and home because they eat like crazy. So he had to go back into the IT market, which is what he was good with, and, you know, and I tried to run the business by myself. And luckily, you know, I had my mom with me. She was my office manager, and she was a bookkeeper when she was younger. So she knew how to do the books. And then we started hiring technicians and started training them, and we've been just going strong ever since. You know, it's been full throttle all the way. I think we had maybe 2008 when a certain president got into office where everything was kind of slowed down for a little bit. Not to talk politics, but you know who I'm talking about.
Sure.
And so that was our only lull, but it was never enough to where, you know, we had to close the doors or anything like that. We still stayed plenty busy, but it's been a whirlwind, that's for sure.
So when people inquire about getting gauge work done, right? Do you, yes, you're big into the hot rod stuff. You're big into the Mopar, the Chevy, the Ford stuff. But do you get stuff that for like, will somebody come in and be like, listen, I've got a 32 Packard, or I have still like a 356, or do you do everything? Like, do you do even older European cars? So say if somebody came in and said, you know, I've got this 1978 Mercedes SL. Is that like, would you guys handle something like that as well?
We do. You know, there's certain clients, you know, we do a lot of stuff for Jay Leno, which we've been super blessed and fortunate to do work for him. So he bought a 190 SL Mercedes out of a crate. You know, he did a whole episode on it. And I know those gauges like the back of my hand, but I don't really have parts. But I still work with North Hollywood Speedometer, so I was able to get any parts that it needed. So he brought me those gauges. We did those. And then, you know, I'm watching Big Dog Garage, you know, Jay Leno's Garage, and he did a whole episode on that car, and he mentioned me by name when he was pointing to the gauges. And there's like the free advertisement, you know, right there. I was like, what the heck? So I started getting phone calls. Hey, do you do Mercedes gauges? And I'm kind of like, yeah, I do. But, you know, I did it for him because it's Jay, and I was still able to get parts. So for correct restoration stuff, we usually pass the European stuff on to North Hollywood Speedometer or Palo Alto Speedometer. Those are the two companies that really know those gauges. There's another place called MoMA Manufacturing that does all the vintage Ferrari stuff. So I send all the Veglia and the Jaeger gauges, you know, for the British cars and stuff, usually to him for correct restoration. But we do a handful of all the customization where a guy wants the original look for a Triumph TR6, but he's putting a SR20 Nissan motor in it. But it wants to look totally stock. So we'll do the TAC conversion, amp to voltmeter conversion. I can convert any of the gauges to talk to any of the new drivetrain that they're using. So yeah, we still do a handful of those. And you know, I got to say one of the biggest ones for us is Jonathan Ward over at Icon 4x4.
Sure.
So he did a Mercedes, or he's doing a Mercedes now, but he did a Rolls Royce. And that is a very ornamental, very cool looking gauge panel, and he had to keep it all stock. So we did all the conversions on that because obviously, you know, he does the Art Morrison chassis and the LS9 crate motors and all that stuff. So we made everything talk to what he was doing, and that's huge because his cars get tons of press, you know. So he gets SEMA, he's in the Optima booth at every.
Oh, he's everywhere. Oh yeah. He's everywhere. So let me ask you, so as time has gone through, so when you started to now, right, has the technology enhanced what you've been able to do? So for instance, if parts are unavailable, can you 3D print stuff? Do you guys get into that? Or is it still kind of like, how has the technology helped?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the company called Speed Hut, they're based out of Utah, and they're a American manufacturer. So they manufacture their stuff in America, nothing from overseas. So they have the stepper motor technology down. So they provide us with a very small circuit board and a stepper motor that allow us to replace just about anything mechanical. So if I have a mechanical oil pressure gauge out of a Ferrari or a Packard, like you were saying, we're doing a set of Packard gauges here right now. I can replace that mechanical meter with a stepper motor and program that meter to work within the same scale as the original face. So that technology, that it's kind of proprietary to us too. Speed Hut, handshake deal, probably one of the best companies out there to work with. They are so good. They provide us with all of our internal parts, so we're able to do those conversions. But we just started doing some 3D print stuff, which we're not doing in house. But there's a company local to us that I'm good friends with from our church, and he's like the main guy at this 3D printing company. So I handed him some small parts. A week later, he comes back with them 3D printed, and they're literally perfect. So that's going to help us a lot in the future. The 3D printing thing, thing for sure is definitely going to help us with being able to make parts that are unobtainable. You just can't find. Speedometer parts weren't anything that were available really to begin with. You have to find cores. We're so lucky that our shop is just stocked full of cores and old speedometers and stuff that we can steal parts out of. And it takes a while to rebuild something when you got to hunt parts down. And we're not hyper organized, which is, kind of my fault. As the business grew, I was like, I'll just set this here and I'll remember where I put it. And then, 3 days later, I'm like, I know I have that, but where did I put it? So that that's been going on for years. So it's kind of stocked up. Luckily, my guys are a little better at it than I am. So they know where to put things so that they can remember where they put them later on.
So Shannon, what is your biggest request? Like, what do you get the most request for? Is it Mopar? Is it Ford? Is it certain years, certain models?
Right now I would say dominant thing in our shop is all the ornament instrument panels from the 40s. So we're like Packards, Lincolns, old Plymouth clusters. We're doing a 33 Plymouth cluster for a customer that wants to put it in a 32 Ford. So the Plymouth cluster is way more ornamental and has more gauges in one package than the Fords did. So we're changed the Plymouth logo to a Ford logo, and then we added a V8 logo to it and doing all the modern internals and all that stuff. So that's probably the majority of work in our shop right now are street rods, hot rods that are being built, even traditional hot rods. So they'll have old flatheads in them or old nail heads. Even just a 327 Chevy engine built. Hollywood Hot Rods is one of a big customer of ours. The traditional hot rod is still really common, and the LS swap stuff. So a lot of guys, if you got a 69 Camaro and you're doing an LS swap and you want the original gauge panel, so we'll convert the original gauge panel to work. But Dakota Digital, on the other hand, has their RTX line, which you are becoming very familiar with. Since we're doing one for your car, or we got one for your car. So their RTX line, R stands for retro. They look like the original panel, but have all the modern goodies, all the modern electronics to work with the LS swaps, new gen Hemi swaps, Coyote swaps, whatever you're doing. And then they did such a great job of making the panels look stock, but have modern illumination at nighttime. And they have this cool feature called chameleon lighting. So you can change the colors of the lighting to all these different colors, like a full spectrum of purple and blue. And to me, the best looking is still the white incandescent that they offer. Because it's so crisp. We just did one in my son's 68 Dodge Coronet. And I tell you, in the installation, their instructions, everything that they do in their kit is top of the line. That's I can't knock their product. Although I think they need to change their name to Dakota Instruments instead of Dakota Digital.
Yes,
because I always have to explain to customers, no, they're not digital. No, I don't want digital, because digital is like Knight Rider. Nobody wants the Knight Rider.
I know. David. Well,
Hasselhoff,
it's interesting because
he's always sticking it to us, Hasselhoff.
Well, For guys that are our age, yes, I get the whole digital thing because I do like when I think of digital, I think of like my old 300ZX with the digital dash in it from
Yeah,
1984.
for
You know what I
sure.
mean? That's what I
Yep.
think of. So yes, they
And then
need to
only
upgrade. I
lasted a
think
couple
Dakota
years,
Instruments.
and it disappeared.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But it's interesting because like I found y'all before I was even into any part of like the entertainment side of this, before I ever
Yeah.
shot my first frame of video, before I ever shot my first thing. And that was with the Daytona that we built back in 2006.
Yeah.
And I had heard of you from Mopar, I think it was Mopar Action or Mopar Muscle magazine, and then
Yeah.
on the forums, and y'all did the first cluster for the Daytona,
Yeah.
which was this beautiful redone B-body cluster, but they were silver-faced gauges, and they were, I mean, absolutely gorgeous. And
Yeah.
it's what I tell everybody is that so now that cluster, as Shannon mentioned, is now we're going with the Dakota Digital because we're doing the you know the red eye swap in the Daytona.
Yeah.
That cluster is actually getting sent back to you because we're
Yeah.
putting that cluster in my 68 Charger because
Yep.
that one we're keeping traditional. And
Yeah. We're gonna
so
refreshen it for you and make sure everything's
yeah.
copacetic.
So I mean that's I think what people need to understand is you know if you have gauges, if you have components, and Shannon, let's talk about switches. That's another thing, right? So we're
Yeah.
not just talking about single sweep gauges or anything like that. You guys restore switches as well, don't you?
You mean like a headlight switch or a
So
rotary
if it's
switch?
like a headlight switch or a rotary switch, do you guys take care of that, or is it pretty much down to just the cluster itself, meaning the gauges?
We focus on just doing the gauges themselves. The switches, a lot of times we can clean them, clean the terminals, make sure if they click and they're nice and positive, they're going to work fine. We do a little bypass on the dimmer switch for the Mopars, which is real common because the dimmer fails. Again, those
Mm-hmm.
parts are available new now from Classic Industries or OER.
Right.
So you can just buy a new one. There's a company called JS Restorations that restores switches, and that's all he does. He just restores Mopar switches. He doesn't do any
Huh.
other switch, just Mopar. So we've got a good working relationship with him. So we'll send a whole swath of switches to him. He'll restore them, send them back to us. He's very efficient. It's pretty expensive. I mean, honestly, to restore a whole set of Mopar switches is $350 to $400. So,
Yeah.
but again, if it's a concourse restoration, you're doing, something that's Pebble Beach worthy, it's worth it to get them done,
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Well,
but no,
so
I stay away from it other than just the cleaning, the detailing, making sure they seem like they're going to work fine. I don't have the ability to even really test the switches.
Right.
So we kind of stay away from the switch thing.
Gotcha. Understood.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because you had said that, you're getting like you're doing a Packard cluster and you're getting a bunch of hot rod clusters. It seems that at least I think from the outside, a lot of people think those cars are going away because a lot of the people who own those cars are someone aging out of the hobby. And yet you're seeing a lot of interest in these cars now. Is that correct?
Absolutely. What's coming up is all the oddball stuff that people didn't even take a look at because they wanted a Cadillac or they wanted a Chevelle or they wanted a Nova.
Yeah.
So now they're looking at Ford Mavericks and they're looking at, they're looking at cars that are still obtainable. International Scouts are huge right now. I got two different companies that send me International Scout gauges because they're LS swapping International Scouts. And I think Scouts are cool. I'm that guy anyway. I was always liking the oddball stuff to begin with.
Right.
But now everybody's starting to look at them through a different lens because Broncos and C10 Blazers have priced themselves out of the normal realm of purchasability for the average Joe. The average Joe guy that's like, I can pick up an International Scout for $4,500 that's still clean and running and driving, and then do an LS swap on it and do that stuff later or whatever. So we're starting to see, all the oddball stuff starting to come in more and more because those cars are more obtainable. Their prices aren't through the roof. All those auction companies, Mecum and Barrett Jackson, and God bless those guys. They got a good thing going. But they drive that market. So the people look and they're like, oh man, short bed C10 pickup truck sells for $35,000 on Barrett Jackson. Where that seems high, but you really can't build one to that level for that money, unless you're doing everything yourself.
Exactly.
So the Ford F100 is starting to look a little bit more desirable, or the Dodge. You see a big resurgence in the 50s and 60s Dodge trucks. Even 3/4 ton long bed trucks are starting to become popular. It's like people are wanting to grab anything they can. That's, if you can pick up one of those trucks that needs a restoration for $2,500, you know,
Oh, grab it.
that's
Absolutely.
an easier pill to swallow, even if you're going to put 25, 30 grand into it, you know.
That's true.
The initial cost is that much better. So yeah, we're starting to see a lot of that, you know, and that's good for us because, you know, it expands our inventory of
Hmm.
artwork and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, we end up gaining, you know, all those artwork files for restoring the gauge faces on Packards
Right.
and Jaguars and, you know, anything that pops up. So it's cool.
So now if you so let's jump 30 years past that or 40 years past that, right? Let's talk 80s and
Yeah.
90s stuff. Because
Yeah.
I know that we're going to talk about this because I know you're big into vintage dirt bikes, right?
Yeah.
Everything from Can-Ams to Kawasaki's, ATKs and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
really cool because like I grew up riding vintage dirt bikes and I love them.
Yeah.
Like I used to have a CR500, which was the scariest death machine that I've ever
Yeah.
ridden in my
Arm
life.
stretcher bike. Ah!
Oh, yeah, completely. But
Yeah.
like but we're going to talk about that in a second. But so are you seeing a resurgence in the 80s and 90s cars? So like IROCs
Sure.
and anything Grand Nationals, things like that. And
Yep.
do you also handle things for imports? So
Yeah.
would Redline do something like I don't know, like a Skyline or a Supra or something like that?
Yep. I have a funny Skyline story. So actually when Skylines first were being imported, they were imported through a company called Motorex. And
Sure.
they were right-hand drive. And I was working at North Hollywood Speedometer at the time. And the guy, I forget his name was Sean. I don't remember what his last name was. He used to bring those cars in like every other week for me to convert the speedometers from kilometer to mile per hour and then program them to read in mile per hour. So we would install this little box and set these dip switches. I mean, it was kind of archaic, but it worked. So I had actually firsthand experience working on those Skylines before they were even like as cool as they are now. You know,
Right.
it was fun, and those cars are definitely very capable. You know, you people
Oh
don't even
yeah.
understand how capable those cars are. But yeah, the import stuff is coming up too. So the big one for us is Datsun. So Datsun 240Z, 260Z,
Yep.
280Z. Those gauges are coming in very regularly for us to restore, even back to original.
Okay.
So, and again, no parts, but most of the time we got cores, or there's a good network, good community of the Z people, Z car people. So they're able to give us cores at a pretty good price and stuff like that. So yeah, even the import stuff is starting to come in. 80s cars for sure, like IROCs. You know, they had an
Yeah.
85 mile per hour speedometer that has, we called it the
Right.
helicopter speedometer because it had dual pointers.
Right. That's right. I remember that. That's right.
So we have a conversion for those to 140. So that was an aftermarket upgrade back in the day when those cars were new. You could buy a 140 mile per hour faceplate from AC Delco, swap the face and change the pointer to the non-helicopter pointer, and then calibrate the speedometer. So those we're starting to see a resurgence of those. So we had the artwork made, and yeah, 140 mile per hour speedometer conversions for IROCs, you know.
For an IROC. I mean, the only way, like, I think the only way we'd do an IROC would do 140s if you pushed it out of a plane. But I think with the
door on an IROC is heavier than my Valiant. I think just the two doors, and the hinges would always sag.
I know that was any F body you ever bought. So like all my old Trans Ams and Camaros, if you got one and you opened the door and it didn't drop an inch and a half, you were like, well, it's not too terrible, right?
Yeah, this car must have really low miles.
So I want to touch on your cars, the car that you have, the car that your son has too, right? Like you've got your 69 Valiant that, I was fortunate enough to drive years and years ago for Big Muscle, one of my old shows. And at that point it had a 360 with a blower on it.
Yeah.
And then you called and said, so I think I'm going to put a Pentastar V6 in this, which I thought was an amazing conversion because nobody had done it. I don't think nobody still does. People still don't do V6 or,
there's one other guy out there.
Conversion.
There's one other guy out there with a Dart that did one. His name's Dave, and he works for Comp Cams. And he's actually further along than I am. His car's running and driving. He's still got a lot of stuff to sort out. But yeah, the platform is really good, way better than I think most people think, and very obtainable. Those engines, I paid $2,400 for mine shipped, and it's a brand new pullout out of a 2013 Wrangler. So it had 15 miles on it. Somebody did a Hemi swap on a brand new Rubicon, and this company that was doing them sent me the motor with the computer and the harness with the pre-cats. So Pentastar motors don't have exhaust manifolds. They just have a port coming out of the side of the cylinder head, an oval port. So it had those manifolds with the catalytic converter. I could probably sell those catalytic converters for like bank right now, right?
Oh yeah, you'll make bank.
Before somebody steals them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got that motor for like $2,400 shipped, you know, and then B&M stepped up and made a bell housing for it. And it's all in the car now. So that's good. It's wired. The transmission's hooked up. I just bled the brakes. I got to do coolant recovery.
Right.
And
so you're close.
I'm very close to starting it and driving it. So it's right. Coolant recovery and exhaust. So those are the two things away from getting that car running and driving. So yeah, I'm hyped on that. Okay.
And then your son's got a 68 Coronet, but it's a 4-door. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you know,
so that's a
father moment. Yeah.
That's a cool car, man.
It is.
First, huge proponent of 4-doors, and I don't understand why there aren't more out there. Talk to us about how that came about, because that's got to be a great father-son project.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So when my son when he turned 20, he's like, Dad, you know, I'm looking at classic cars and I really want to get a Roadrunner. And I'm like, whoa, wow, you know, you don't have the money for a Roadrunner. So I said, why don't we start looking at a satellite? So my son grew up, of course, with me. So he knew he worked here at my shop when he was 15 years old. So he knows the ins and outs of the car industry kind of, and a big Fast and Furious fan. So watching all the Fast and Furious and Tokyo Drift, which commonly gets overlooked, at the very end has Vin Diesel rolling in in the 70 Roadrunner built by Pure Vision called the Hammer. And he rolls in at the very end of that movie. And my son just gravitated to that car, to that body style, the 70 Roadrunner. So yeah, when he turned 20, he's like, Dad, I got some money saved up. I want to get my first classic, you know. So we started looking at satellites. So I couldn't find a 2-door satellite anywhere. He had about $12,000 to spend, you know, which is a lot for a 20-year-old.
That's a lot.
To save that kind of money.
Yeah, that's a lot. Good for him.
He started working at 15. He's a saver. That's a blessing from his mom, not from me. So he saved his money. And so we started looking at satellites, couldn't find any 2-door satellites in that price range either. So we started looking at 4-doors, and then this Coronet popped up, and it was in Tennessee. Second owner, 1 repaint, original interior, 318 2-barrel with dual exhaust, and it had kind of like ghetto looking like chrome wheels on it, which we got rid of, you know, kind of right away. But we bought it sight unseen. I was just going by a bunch of pictures that the guy sent me. And we got it for $12,400 with delivery. It cost me $400 or $500 to have it delivered from Tennessee. So, and he got it on Christmas 2020. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's super cool. Runs great. Still has points ignition. Still has the factory wiring harness that is untouched in unbelievable condition. And you know, Mopar harnesses don't stand the test of time.
No, they don't.
This one has. So my wiring guy came down. We did the Dakota Digital panel in it. He was like marveling over the factory harness. The bulkhead connections were all perfect. I mean, this car was like, it's so clean. So first order of business, of course, was to get rid of the wheels. So we went to year one, and year one has their Magnum 500 replica wheels that are like a billet wheel. They may be forged in 17-inch, and we put did the right back spacing, got some Toyo tires for it, and did all the Hotchkiss suspension. So a lot of people know that I'm in with John Hotchkiss and that whole crew. I've supplied cars to them for development. You know, they give me a great deal on parts. John Hotchkiss and that whole crew is like, I mean, they know that torsion bar suspension so well.
Listen, they
know how to make those cars handle.
Yes, they do.
There's plenty of other companies out there making good stuff too, so I'm not going to knock anybody else. But Hotchkiss, I think, is at the forefront of making original cars handle well. You know, besides going totally in the other direction with coilovers and rack and pinion and all that stuff. Yeah. Unbelievable how well you can make a torsion bar car handle, and you know that by driving my car. You know, and you've had plenty of torsion bar cars yourself that have been well sorted.
Well, the Daytona, even with the red eye conversion, is still going to run torsion bars and leaf springs. Because
awesome. I didn't know that. I thought you were going to have to go.
No, not at all. And this is what people don't understand. Like, you understand how well a torsion bar car can handle. I understand it. Most people, the first thing they want to do is grab torsion bars and throw them in the garbage. And I'm like, it is one of the best classic car suspensions out there. Ride height is fully adjustable. Yes, it's leaf springs, but so what? If you set that, your Valiant handles beautifully. That car handled spectacular. And I think that people overlook the torsion bars, which is a real shame because it really is a competent suspension that can be set up properly to be fantastic.
Yeah. Biggest thing is getting that adjustable upper control arm.
Yep.
And being able to get caster in it, and then getting rid of the Mopar steering box and going with the Borgeson steering box. You know, that it's a Nissan box. I don't know how many Mopar guys are going to be happy about that, but it is a Nissan box.
It works.
It works. They reformatted it to fit in the Mopars, and that was probably one of the best upgrades I did to my Valiant, was putting that box in the car. That thing is just, it feels like a rack. You know, you drove it, so you know.
Oh yeah,
it centers perfectly. The turn in is really minor. You don't have to hand over hand, you know, the wheel all the time. So,
So with the Coronet 316 still has points, right?
Yeah.
Does it still have points?
Yeah, still.
Or 318 still points. Is it running like a 904 transmission?
904 2-barrel. It has dual exhaust, so it kind of sounds like a V8, but it's very anemic, which is good because, you know, my son doesn't need to get in trouble with you know, a crazy car like that right now. But his daily driver is a Scat Pack Charger. He bought a 2021 Scat Pack Charger. So my son works in the studio business, so you know he's making good money in the studio business.
He's doing well.
He's able to afford this stuff. Yeah.
Good for him.
So he knows what horsepower feels like now. So that's the next thing for the Coronet, is to start thinking about what kind of a motor are we going to put in it. You know, what's going to happen there.
So any chance that he would, because you can hop up a 318 to make 400 horsepower with your eyes closed. It's not difficult to do.
Sure. Yeah.
Any chance he would keep the 318 in there, or do you think and if you do a swap, do you think you would go Gen 3 Hemi? You think you'd do 5.7, 6.4, something along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like what's the, you know, in our ideas right now. Is my original idea was, I have a 360 Magnum here at the shop on an engine stand out of a 97 Dodge Ram pickup truck. So the 408 stroker is almost a no-brainer, and you take the 318 out, put the 360 in. It's like that easy. The swap is, you know, like a one-day swap. So that was my initial idea. But again, to build a 408 stroker, you know, what does that cost nowadays? You know, maybe $7,000-8,000 to build a competent, you know, 408 stroker. So then some of the guys at Mopar Connection magazine were hitting me up like, hey, you know, that car's worthy of a Gen 3 Hemi. Why don't you start looking into doing a 5.7 Hemi swap? Those motors can be obtained pretty cheap. So now that's the other thing. Holley is big on the Gen 3 Hemi swap stuff right now. They have the mounts. There's another company that's making the engine swap parts. Why am I not thinking of their name right now? Probably even
Holley has helped us out massively with our, you know, with the Daytona swap, which has been great. But well, that's very cool. The fact that he's got an old Coronet, and I think, you know, it's great to get kids into this. And I say kids because, listen, at 20, I think he's still a kid. You know, I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, he's still my baby. He's still my baby.
Right. he's gonna hear this and be like, "Thanks a lot, Dad. I appreciate that."
On, Dad.
So
he knows.
But does he run the bikes with you as well? Is he into the vintage dirt bikes as well?
He didn't do that. You know, it's weird. I tried to get my son into motorcycles when he was little. You know, I bought him a quad, and then we went from a quad to a dirt bike, and he knows how to ride, but he never really got into it like how I was. He was more into like soccer. So he was more like a team sports kid, where I was the non-team sports kid. I skateboarded, I did BMX, I did motocross. Those were all things that just required me and a machine. You didn't have to rely on a team. So I was that guy in high school. He was more of the team guy. You know, he played soccer, did really well at soccer. I started playing soccer with him and going to the soccer center and stuff like that, and really started to enjoy that sport as well. And it's funny because, you know, as a kid, as a teenager, skateboarding and BMX, we always looked at jocks as like the meatheads, you know, like dumb jock. Right. And that was actually the wrong attitude, because when he was playing soccer and he played football his freshman year of high school, the intricacy that goes into football is nuts. I mean, my gosh, I learned it from a whole nother perspective. So sorry to all the jocks out there that I used to bag on and called.
No, listen, man.
You know?
It's interesting because I was very individual like you were, right? Yeah. I never played team sports. I used to cycle. I used to race bicycles back in the day. And then I graduated. I started road racing motorcycles, right? Dang. Anything that was the team, I was like, I could do it by myself.
Yeah.
And I was generally I liked that fact because I didn't rely on anybody else. It was just relying on myself, which I like. If I won, I won. If I crashed, I crashed. You know, if I screwed up, I screwed up. So that was kind of good. But why the vintage bikes? Like I personally get it because I'm a huge vintage bike guy. Like I grew up riding in the late 80s, all through the 90s and the early 2000s. So those are the bikes that speak to me. The new stuff, I go, it's beautiful, it's fantastic, but I don't want it. I just, and I think
the same way.
Yeah. Part of it, I think, is because it's kind of like old cars, right? I like analog. I don't like things like traction control and anti-lock brakes on a motorcycle. I like stuff that if I want to be able to slide stuff and control things with the throttle as opposed to the bike the vehicle telling you not to do that. Are you in that same boat?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I gravitated towards vintage motocross probably about 5 years ago because all the bikes that I wanted as a kid that I couldn't afford, I can now buy those. And they're fairly, they're really easy to maintain. There's a good parts inventory out there. So yeah, I mean, and I stick to the late 70s, early 80s because they still had good suspension travel. So you can still jump the bikes. So I raced modern bikes in the late 90s from like 1994 to 98, 99. That's when I raced motocross. So riding a modern bike, I didn't think about the vintage stuff then. But then as I got older, I'm like, I want to get like a vintage bike, So I bought a 1979 Can-Am 250, which again, I had to be the oddball, even the vintage crowd is like, Honda CR250 Elsinore,
right.
Or an RM125, Yamaha, Bob Hanna, whatever.
Yep.
So I had to buy a Can-Am because nobody sees those at the track, and there's a good network of Can-Am people. The bike worked really well. The motor had a rotary chamber engine. So, totally different design than a reed valve engine or whatever. So it had a really smooth power, really easy to ride. Getting older, it's like, I don't want anything like a CR500, which a lot of these vintage guys still ride, which I don't get because they're always getting hurt, and breaking their collarbones. I'm like, I'm too old to do that. I got to work on Monday. I'm going to race on Sunday and go to work on Monday.
Dude, I had a CR 500 30 years ago, and it scared the shit out of me then.
Yeah. I mean, even now to this day, that bike will hold its own against any modern, 450 for sure. Power wise.
I mean, if you put a street tire on the back of that thing and the quarter mile go toe to toe with any super bike out there right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They're fast. And that's for
people
sure.
You try to explain it. You're like, it's a 500cc 2-stroke. It's a light switch. There's nothing linear about it. It's on or off. And you did the greatest expression before. You were just like, you just kind of hold on and see what happens.
Oh yeah. Arm stretcher. Stretch the arms out. Yeah. They're nuts.
So, but when you race vintage bikes, right? So a lot, and it's interesting because in the photos that you post on like Instagram and on social media and stuff, you're not easy on these bikes. You're jumping these things. You're caning these things.
Oh yeah, that's why I like going to the 70s, 80s bikes because they still had good suspension travel, and a lot of suspension tuners can still work with those shocks to make them work even better than the best guys could back then. So there's valving tricks and companies like Race Tech and Nolene.
Yeah,
I mean, they know how to take the vintage forks and shocks, and a lot of guys update the forks. They'll update the shock to modern stuff and then make it fit the bike to make those bikes handle even better. So part of the fun thing about racing vintage is when you go to a practice day at the track and you're practicing out there with all the modern bikes, and you take a guy on an uphill and do the tabletop at the very top and next to the guy on the modern bike, and then pass him and hit the whoop section and nail it and still hammer the whoop section on a dual shocker. These guys are like, what the heck, So it's a conversation piece too. So you're sitting there with your vintage bike and people are always up there, wanting to know about it, and a lot of the older guys will be like, I had one of those when I was a kid, it's so cool. So they're a good conversation piece too. It's a good opportunity to just meet new people and stuff like that, because not too many vintage bikes show up to the track on a practice day. So it's you're one of the only guys out there, so it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talk about track stuff, and I remember when I used to go to the track, like HPDE days with my old Charger, with my 68 Charger, and guys were in Corvettes and 911s and everything else. And I would show up in a 40-year-old sled and they'd be like, what are you doing here with that?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Right. And then I would go out And some you could keep up with them and a lot of times exceed them because they just didn't have enough seat time. But people I think discount a lot of older stuff, and it's great to see a resurgence in vintage everything, whether it's automobiles or motorcycles. We touched on RC cars because it's that kind of nostalgia thing, which is a wonderful. Like I still have a actually up on my shelf up here. I still have a Tamiya lunchbox up there, which I use, which is awesome. And it's one of those things whereby you don't see them. And when people do see them, all these memories come back. And people, I think, for some reason, fail to realize that they're still obtainable. You could still go out and buy a vintage dirt bike like a Can-Am or an old Honda or an old Kawasaki. And they're not difficult to maintain.
No, they're super easy. Gosh, they're way easier to work on than these modern bikes. The modern bikes are fuel injected and they have map switches, and you can take your phone out and change the ignition mapping on your phone with a modern bike, and that's cool. Don't get me wrong. It's super cool. But working on a vintage bike, like a 2-stroke, especially if it starts to get clapped out, you can pull the cylinder off and re-ring it or put piston and rings in it in 45 minutes and your bike's fresh again. You look at these modern 4-strokes and you scratch your head. You're like, valve adjustment? What? Timing chains? No. And they, to be the modern 4-strokes, they sound like a wet fart on the track. So they don't sound good at all.
Right.
Even the older 4-strokes sound better than these new ones. They sound horrible.
Right. Well, there's nothing like the sound of a 2-stroke.
Yeah,
nothing.
For sure.
I don't care what anybody said. They sound amazing.
And the smell.
Well, let me ask you this. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to mix your own oil, I used to love doing, oh my God, there are things that I miss. Now, see, this is bad because now we're going to finish this and I'm going to, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
400 in your future. Yeah.
You're going to be getting a lot of links.
I'm sending you links. That's right. I'm going to be sending you Craigslist posts like, dude, this bike's close to me. Want me to go check it out?
Yeah, I'm going to be like, damn it, Shannon, what are you trying to kill me now? Oh my God. But that's the beauty of it. It really is. And I think, a lot of it is even if you haven't ridden in a while, it's great to throw that leg back over the saddle. You don't have to go bananas, but get back out there and keep riding. And I think it's such a wonderful hobby. And especially we're super fortunate that here in California, we have fire roads and trails all over the place and tracks that people can go and they can explore. So very fortunate to be out here on the West Coast to be able to do that. But let me ask you this, because believe it or not, we're coming up on an hour, which is odd because that was extremely fast.
You're going to edit it, right?
No, we just put it right up just like this.
Okay. Nice.
What do you see being in the automotive and in the motorcycle hobby? What do you see as the upcoming trends now that you never thought would be a trend, whether it's automobiles or motorcycles? Are you starting to see things that people are starting to restore now that you're like, I didn't think that was going to be a thing, but it is?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the big one right now, which we need to look at in this hobby, which is going to probably ruffle some feathers, is the electric stuff. So you're starting to see electric conversions and swaps for the vintage car. So Jonathan Ward did that with an old Mercury, like a lead sled looking Mercury. And of course, we didn't get to do the gauges in it because it was all electric, but we did do the clock. So we restored the clock for him and made that work. But you kind of can't deny it. That is definitely something that's going to be on the horizon, even in motocross. So there's a new company, I think called Stark Racing or something like that, that just came out with an electric motocross bike that will rival the power of anything out there. And it's totally controllable. You can control the power. You can make it work like a 125, or you can make it work like a 450. It's 80 horsepower electric bike, and it has the run time of a full tank of gas in a 450. So that means you can do GPs with it. You can do motocross with it. So you're going to see that technology coming through, whether that's the newest thing on the horizon or that's maybe longer in the future, but still, the next thing would be the import stuff. So, I mean, huge Nissan pickup truck, a Nissan hard body pickup truck, a Mitsubishi
from like the 80s
pickup truck. Yeah. Yep.
Really?
You're starting to see big money coming out of those trucks. And, the NAPZ engine was a twin plug 4-cylinder engine. That was an excellent motor and very tunable. Any Toyota Hilux pickup truck. Yeah. The mini truck thing's starting to come back. And because you just got to go drive the new Ford Maverick, which is
I did.
a very, very much a real mini truck. It's not
and it's
good.
good.
As a Ford Ranger, it's not as big as a, it's probably more like the size of a Dodge Dakota. I'm gonna guess, probably more like mid-size.
It's a little, the Maverick is a little smaller than a Dakota. I would say it's probably, I mean, the bed is short. The bed is a 4-foot bed, a 4-foot 6-inch bed, I think, something like that.
A quad cab, right? It's a real 4-door.
It's a 4-door. What I found interesting about the Maverick was that it is a very usable truck.
Yeah.
A very usable truck. Now, are you going to put a 4x8 sheet of plywood in? Sure, you actually can when you lower the bed, and Ford has given you options on which on a safe way to get a piece of plywood in. Why that's still the things by which pickup trucks are measured, I don't know, but yes, you can do it. But it's more the price point, right? For 20 grand, you can get a 2-wheel drive hybrid truck that gets 44 miles to the gallon. That's comfortable. That is, easily has a lot of options in there for not a lot of money, which is why Ford can't keep them in stock. Dealers can't keep them in stock. But you're absolutely right. I feel like the Maverick is going to kick off the new mini truck craze because that's exactly what it is.
For sure. Yeah, it's funny that you said that because a friend of mine that works for an insurance company out here, he bought one of those Mavericks new. He bought the EcoBoost one. And he only owned it for like 3 weeks. And then another dealership wanted to buy it off of him for like $4,000 more than what he paid for it. And he wasn't married to it. He kind of bought it because he knew the market was going to be hot. So he kind of prepared himself for this. And sure enough, within 3 weeks, he sold it back to another dealership. And it only had like 3,000 miles on it. I mean, and they
smart man.
Yeah, they're marking them up. Yeah. Yeah. So the mini truck thing's getting popular. I think that's going to become, all the people that you got to think of that are in their 40s now, that was the cool car to have when they were teenagers. So now they're in a place where they can afford something like that. So you're going to start seeing the value go up. Like I was saying, the Nissan hard body trucks, if you find a clean one, people want $7,000 for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was a truck literally 3 years ago you could have bought for $2,000 or $1,500 even, So
I think
prices are coming up.
Prices are going up, but I mean, listen, we talk about this all the time, right? Where the average price of a new car is $40,000, right? Which is crazy. Listen, I don't know about everybody else. To me, 40 grand is a bunch of money, right?
Yeah.
So I look at stuff and I go, okay, well, what can I look at on the used market that I can get into? And like, I was very fortunate. Like my daily is a 96 Bronco, right? And I bought that 2.5 or 3 years ago and I paid 10 grand for it. And with 98,000 miles, and I was like, that's I guess that's an okay price for this vintage. Yeah. Now it's worth more than double that. Yeah. But what's crazy is I still look at those things, and I'm sure you do too to some extent. When you say, is a 96 Bronco a $25,000 driving experience? And the answer is no. It's not. It's like a $6,000 to $10,000 driving experience if it's a perfect truck. If it's not a perfect truck, I don't know. It's a $3,000 driving experience, right?
With today's gas prices, that thing probably gets 10 miles a gallon.
Dude, it's a 12. It's a solid 12. The thing that kills you is, thankfully, work from home, so it's not bad. But that 33-gallon tank to fill up, that stings.
Yeah,
that definitely stings.
Over $100, easy to put.
Easy. Thank God it runs on 87. Thank God.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. So now we're at about an hour. Where can everyone find you? Where can they find out about Redline? Where can they find out about what Shannon is doing with vintage dirt bikes? And the other part is, you need to start your own site just on vintage dirt bikes, because I follow. Yeah, oh, absolutely, because it's cool as hell.
Yeah,
it's cool as hell, and it's got guys like you should. It's got guys like me going, man, I should probably buy another dirt bike right now, even though I have absolutely no use for one. So, but where can everybody find you?
On an RD 400, dude, street bike, like a twin cylinder, 2-stroke, air cooled Yamaha RD 400, or maybe an RZ 350 or something like that.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. All right, so we're gonna have to talk offline about that and maybe get my butt in the saddle of one of those. But where can everybody find you? Where can they find Shannon? Where can they find Redline? What's the best places to go?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is the most common way that I communicate with Redline Gageworks. So Redline Gageworks on Instagram is, I'm always posting stuff there. That's where you can see all the jobs in the shop. When they get done, I usually post pictures of all the newest jobs done. Our website, we updated it with our new logo and stuff like that, but it's kind of stale. Like you were telling me that you couldn't click on pictures. So I need to get my web guy over here to get that sorted out. But our Instagram link is on our website. Of course, our email is on our website. We like to talk on the phone still. So,
That's great.
if you have a question about something, you don't have to email me this big old long question, because I'm going to look at it and go, I'm just going to ask him to call me because I don't want to try to respond to that, So it's easier for me to explain over the phone. So you could talk to me directly. The Dakota Digital stuff, we're a direct distributor. So you support small business. I got great prices on anything Dakota Digital, anything Speed Hut, anything Autometer. So if you want to order gauges, you call, talk to me, place the order over the phone. You don't have to go to a website and click on a link. So it's kind of old school in that way. And I can give you your options as far as what's the most cost effective versus what needs to be done. That's the best way to get a hold of us. Facebook, of course. I'm on Facebook and Instagram pretty much all day now, just for the business, answering questions on Facebook. Our Facebook page gets updated as our Instagram gets updated. So all the pictures end up on our Facebook. So that's another good way. Yeah, that's probably the best way to do. You can go to our website, click on the links, or, go to our Instagram, follow us on Instagram. My personal Instagram that has most of my motorcycle stuff on it is closed for just friends and family, stuff like that. Yep. But like you said, I might have to come up with another one just for the dirt bike stuff. Yeah. I mean, I'm doing that pretty regularly. I'm pretty much racing once a month now through a group called American Retro Cross. And it's just it's mostly vintage guys, but they do have modern bike, but just a great group of old school homies out there riding dirt bikes. They're not trying to take each other out. It's so much fun. We race at Glen Helen, which is one of the premier tracks. It's always groomed. They always change the track. It's always watered. Great group of people. So anybody out there wanting to take their hand at vintage motocross, that's one thing to look up for sure. American Retro Cross.
Awesome. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It is always great to talk to you. I have a feeling you're going to be costing me money because now I know I'm going to have to buy a dirt bike, which is a pain in the ass, but I know I'm going to do it anyway.
Dirt bike or a street bike, right?
Well, I had a street bike. I had a 93 VFR that I bought that I love, but I actually just sold it because I wasn't riding it, only because the traffic up here has gotten bananas. And I was like, you know what? I think I'd rather just ride off-road than ride on the road. I think this is just the self-preservation route that I'm going as I go. We'll find something.
I'll send you some links for sure.
All right, good. Well, dude, again, thank you so much for coming on. Have a wonderful, wonderful holiday.
You too,
I will be talking to you very soon.
We'll be chatting soon. All right, dude.
All right, buddy. Be well.
Care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.